Just to warn members of the public and members of the committee, because the TPO at St Luke's Avenue actually expires in the morning, I do need to take this TPO discussion now. Apologies for that, but it is actually important that we actually make a decision whilst it's still in force. Right, so we're moving to item 22 on page 352. I ask the officer to briefly introduce the report on 19 St Luke's Avenue. I apologise for the delay to other things, but it is actually essential. But I think we've got that.
I will try and be as quick. I know there's some large items on the agenda for this one. This is to seek confirmation of the TPO order 5010/2017 without modification. Just going through very briefly through the slide. This is the tree, the beech tree, view from St Luke's Road. From opposite 48 Luke's Road, this is the tree in question. So in terms of visibility in the street scene, it's highly visible in the context of the street, so meets the requirement for the TPO issue in the first place. This is why it was issued. This is in front of 48 Luke's Road. Again, it's quite a substantial girth in terms of tree size of the beech tree. This is showing the proximity to the boundary with the site off to the left here. This was subject of a planning application for a new dwelling. But that's not for consideration as part of this. That formed the principal ground for refusal on that application due to the impact on this tree. This is just showing the crown spread and looking down the boundary. So that site, the garages you've just seen are over to the left, showing the extent of the overhang into the plot. You'll notice in the report, the appraisal the report sets out the objections to the confirmation of the TPO and also the supports. I draw your attention to the urgent updates, which includes also some additional information both on seen and unseen papers. And I would just point out the issue that members are considering for decision is whether the provisional TPO order should be made permanent by confirming it. And this decision is unrelated to the planning proposal, as I've said, insofar as neither the proposal itself nor the potential of the garage plot for redevelopment in general are under consideration. So your officer's recommendation is to confirm the order without modification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr Bailey. Can I take any declarations of lobbying? Councillor Harwood, Councillor Cox, Councillor Powell, and I've been lobbied as well. Councillor Clark too. Councillor Prendergast, thank you very much. Right, I'll call Mr Watson the objector, please. Mr Watson. You have 3 minutes if you press the grey button in the middle, sir.
For the records, my name is Walton, yes. And also, according to the Planning Service report, the TPO expires on the 14th of September, not tomorrow. But I appreciate you bringing me forward. Thank you. May I start? Thank you. Good evening. The Planning Services report gives an excellent listed summary of the 16 objections raised. However, it fails to specifically address any of these in the appraisal. Basically, it just reiterates previous information and defaults to the status quo. There appears to be a certain amount of contradiction in suggesting that the decision is that the decision is unrelated to the planning proposal, but then goes on to say that the redevelopment consideration was the principal reason to expediently protect this tree. Indeed, the hasty imposition of the TPO, whilst the planning application was still actively under consideration, would appear to go against government guidelines. One of the 4 generalised support statements concedes that the tree annually sheds leaves and debris, and as the trunk virtually hugs our boundary fence with just a gap of 25 centimetres, and with a canopy in excess of 8.5 metres, then half of this material, of course, will detrimentally fall upon our land for which we'd have no redress. We would no longer have common law rights to mitigate the situation. The supportive adjoining local resident has facing windows and solar panels that must surely be affected by this 22-metre high beech tree when in full leaf. One particular aspect of the report that is puzzling is suggesting that this is, and I quote, an area of town with few mature trees, unquote. However, St Luke's Avenue implies a tree-lined thoroughfare, and indeed it is, along with St Luke's Road, and both have been so in my memory for at least the past 55 years. In fact, there are even more mature trees in the nearby local churchyard. This calls into question the integrity of the other assessment data. This inappropriately located common gross tree with minimal amenity value would blight our land if unmaintained and progressively will worsen. How in the future will we control it? In my view, this TPO has been strategically pursued purely as a ploy to thwart a planning application for a much-needed residential property. I respectfully ask the committee to reject the confirmation of this tree preservation order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Walton. I apologise for misreading that earlier. Mr Rowell, a supporter of...
Good evening, Mr Chairman and members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of the owner of the beech tree in question, as well as for myself and many other local residents, some of whom have written in to support this tree preservation order, as you can see, 2.5 pages in summary in this evening's update. I believe it's unusual for a TPO to have to go through planning committee. Nobody wants to bother with the TPO unless it's actually needed. But this TPO is needed, and I'll explain why. Last November, my wife and I were woken one Saturday morning by the sound of a chainsaw some 20 metres from our bedroom window. An agile young man was lopping lengths of a tall and rather graceful fir tree behind the little garages for no visible reason. When I went to ask him why, he said he'd been instructed to by a man who said he owned the garages and had keys to them, but didn't seem familiar with using the keys. He said he'd also been instructed to cut the beech tree nearby, and that the beech tree's owner had agreed to this. But he, the young tree surgeon, thought the beech might already be protected. It is a magnificent tree. So he checked with its owner first, who told him no such agreement had been sought or given. He told us that if he had cut the beech tree as instructed, that would have killed it. He wasn't pleased at this situation, and he told me the beech tree's owner wasn't pleased either, very understandably. The following Monday, the next working day, the beech tree's owner wrote to the council to ask about a tree preservation order, and so here we are this evening. Mr Chairman, the initiative for this TPO has come from a local resident keen to protect his tree from the threat, frankly, of butchery by someone with an interest in the garages. And as you've seen in this update report, a lot of other locals want this tree protected too. The fact is, whoever commissioned the tree surgeon to commit these acts actually provoked this tree preservation order. And so, on behalf of the beech tree's owner, as well as local residents, I respectfully ask the committee to confirm this TPO as permanent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Rowell. Councillor Cox is the ward member, so we're going to take him first.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. You've heard from 2 residents who live very near to this tree, but a further 20-odd have also submitted reasons to keep the tree. The picture you see there is actually not showing how tall it actually seems in the scene if you look around the back of these houses. Indeed, St Luke's Avenue and Road have many trees on them, but it's the ones at the back of the houses that are almost more needed. When you look out of the back of your house, it's trees like this that give presence to your surrounding community. So please support what's on the papers. The evaluation of this tree has been set out by officers, and I'm sure you can see the need to keep the preservation order in place.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to speak on this? Councillor Harwood, as the seconder, you get preference. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm very happy to second this. This is a magnificent landmark tree, and we've lost an awful lot of magnificent landmark trees in this general area in just the last few weeks. So there is a real and present danger, and a lot of this comes from development aspiration, in that these large trees are seen as an obstacle to future development. However, I think it's just not the landscape contribution of this tree. It's the contribution in terms of cleansing the air in what is a very heavily trafficked part of the town. It is its value for local wildlife. It's a very important tree, and it's very beautiful. We are seeing, for example, the lime trees in Sittingbourne Road just next to these are being progressively lost because services have cut through their roots. The Highway Authority say they cannot replace those trees as they die off. And I see another one is dead now. So I think it's trees in back gardens are the only ones who've got the room to breathe in terms of their roots to actually be sustainable in the long term. So I commend this TPO.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Prendergast, then, and that will be it.
Well, I put my hand up originally because I was going to move to go with the officer's recommendation. It's quite interesting listening to Councillor Harwood talking about developer aspirations sometimes having impacts, but that is a beautiful tree and it should be saved. And I just wanted to say that I had an entire ancient woodland in my ward which expired last month. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prendergast. Right, it has been proposed and seconded that we maintain the TPO. All those in favour? That's everyone, I think. So no abstentions, no votes against. Okay, motion carried. So the TPO will be reconfirmed. We now move on to what is probably still going to be more contentious than that. Item 13, page 2 of your report, land south of Sutton Road, Langley.
So in terms of the Section 106 agreement, which was the only reason why, it's taken 14 months to get signed, or rather hasn't been signed. It's exactly like the previous one we discussed.
Indeed, which may lead us to an interesting discussion later on. Nevertheless, I would like any additional points of introduction you wish to make?
Thank you, Chair. The application, as the committee will be aware, was considered in some detail on the 17th of August and deferred for the same reasons as the previous land north of Pickney Wood. The urgent update report includes the KCC-MBC letter that members already referred to, and indeed outlines similar points to the previous report on highways matters. I don't think there's anything else particular to add apart from the introduction on page 4 of the report outlines the main changes that have occurred since the report was considered in July 2016. Nothing substantive has changed with the application apart from the lack of opportunity for an upgrading of an off-site footway to a cycleway detailed at the top of page 5. Apart from that, the application is exactly the same as one that was agreed by members back in July last year.
Just one technical point before we go. This reference was made previously to the on-site or off-site provision of the medical facility. Would you mind refreshing our memories where we are with that?
Yeah, the Section 106 has been subject, as has been mentioned, to considerable negotiation. Current state of play in regard to the medical facility is that an on-site facility is sought, but that as a backstop, a financial contribution would be obtained.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Right. We now move to the speaking part of this discussion. First speaker is Councillor Taylor Maggio of Langley Parish Council.
Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. KCC and MBC officers may have met and agreed various conditions, but this still does not solve the issue of cumulative impact and the resultant air pollution caused by the traffic impact of an additional 1,300 houses, including this application, on the Sutton Road and the Wheatsheaf Junction. This poses a serious risk and threat to the health of current and future residents of Maidstone, and cannot be fully mitigated by a Leeds-Langley bypass, which will simply spark more development, destroy landscape and create even more traffic. I agree with Councillor Harwood on this. The County Council still has strong objections to this application in relation to its location on the Sutton Road. If you now decide to ignore KCC, the Statutory Highways Authority, you will now be accountable to the residents for the adverse impact of this concentration of Sutton Road sites on traffic volumes, congestion and further degraded air quality. There will just not be anywhere near full mitigation on site and wider area impact, whether that be on Maidstone Centre or villages, including those rat runs. To pretend otherwise is to bury the head in the sand. And air quality as a subject has moved on since the local plan examination. Enhanced medical facilities within the proposals will be small comfort when patients are likely to be those added to the numbers of us already suffering respiratory problems. That is a political sop for public consumption, endeavouring to mask the underlying reality of a poor outcome for Maidstone residents. Officers have warned about the threat to 5-year housing supply, even though windfall delivery is such that we are on course to deliver a huge extra number over the plan period. That warning is not correct. MBC officers have also warned about the risk of appeal costs should you not approve these sites. And, as you have heard this evening, there would be an arguable defence that MBC is acting in accordance with the lawful advice of the Highways Authority and reacting to the national imperative to avoid further damage to air quality. If an appeal from a developer does give rise to costs, MBT would be amply covered by a small portion of the £15 million borough reserves already generated from the New Homes bonus. Without these sites, the housing requirement would still be deliverable, while reacting properly to the growing threat of air pollution. Please do the right thing and show that we are.
I said I had to stop you, and I've turned your microphone off because you're over time. Mr. Hawkins, for the applicant. Oh, sorry, it's your colleague.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Rosa Etherington, and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, Countryside Properties. This is an application that has been submitted to the Council since 2015. Since then, members have resolved to grant planning permission for it, and the Inspector has confirmed this is a suitable site for housing growth, and sought to include it within a local plan which the Council will adopt later this month. Obviously, the deferral at the last Planning Committee was disappointing. However, we fully understand the reasons for this and fully support the engagement with KCC. However, Countryside Properties, unfortunately, were not privy to any discussions that's since been held between Maidstone and Kent County Council, and therefore are happy for the Cascade provision to be removed from the Section 106 if members felt it was necessary. On another note, this application, the Land South of Sutton Road application, makes substantial 106 contributions towards community facilities, which at the moment do not specify an intended destination. Countryside Properties would be fully willing for our community centre contributions to go towards Ottham if members felt this was an appropriate destination. The draft Section 106 legal agreement is now at an advanced stage and nearing finalisation. We are happy to engage with the chair of this committee on the draft to ensure that the key issues discussed at committee tonight are addressed. This is a site that is crucial to both Maidstone's strategic and 5-year housing land supply, and so the delivery of this site within the near future will bring about the ability for Maidstone to give their local plan full weight, and to therefore resist less appropriate development elsewhere within the borough. It is therefore hoped that this evening members acknowledge the efforts made by officers and to resolve to approve this application in accordance with the papers before them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newton, you're a very busy man this evening.
Sorry, my leg's gone dead. I have very serious concerns about this particular application because the impact of it will be in Ottham. Because people leaving this estate to either go into the town of Maidstone will rat run down through Imperial Park, down Gore Court Road, Church Road, left into Derringwood Drive or right into Mallard's Way. Now, there has been a traffic survey that has been carried out on this road by KCC and in conjunction with Amy, and was commissioned by Downswood Parish Council and Ottham Parish Council. However, none of the readings that were obtained by the meters that were positioned around this area accounted for the number of houses that are going to be built on this particular estate. So this will impact significantly on us. And, you know, I totally support the Langley Parish Council in trying to get something done about this particular site. For your information, the traffic flow per annum down Church Road is 1.66 million movements per annum. That into Mallard's Way, bearing in mind it floods on the 14th of July, it flooded to a depth of 18 inches, so nobody could get through. That is 1.06 million traffic movements per annum. That is evidence. It is freely available for you to see, and I trust you have looked at that, because it will impact on Ottham. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. As officers said, there is an urgent update, and can I take declarations of lobbying at this point? Let's say, has anyone not been lobbied? I think everyone's been lobbied. Thank you. Mr. Jarman, you indicated that you had something you wanted to...
Yeah. Obviously, the inspector analysed this site in great detail. There was objections from KCC, there was objections from local residents, etc. But on a specific matter of air quality, I do agree with Ms Taylor Maggio, it is an important issue, so much so that there was a hearing devoted to air quality at the examination, and it didn't stop there. Just before the inspector wrote his final report, he wrote a bespoke letter to me, pointing out just how important it is to do something about air quality, rather than just describe it. So what he asked for was our air quality DPD to actually be brought forward, to be done sooner. And he reminded myself of the policy criteria, which he had agreed to, which was all about modal shift, improvements to the junctions along the A274 to actually do something positive about air quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Councillor Mrs. Stockwell. Councillor Mrs. Stockwell, did you want to say anything at this point, as this is at least partly your ward?
Yes, I will at this point. Well, I totally support what Langley Parish Council are saying on this application. I think it will have quite an impact in that area. So, you know, I shall be against. I shall be voting against it.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Stockwell. Councillor Borton, I think you indicated.
Yeah, I did. Just a quick question, probably for legal. Does the resolution that we gave on the last application, just then in the change from the recommendation that the officers proposed at the start of this meeting, have any bearing or impact on this particular application that we're considering, or should we in effect, the recommendation is as on the papers?
Well, each application needs to be decided on its own merits. However, having said that, you've got a lot of these applications, or as has been pointed out on a plan which James put up earlier, there is an overlap and an interlink between these. So things like highways, for example, you find it very difficult to find against highways issues because they are all interlinked and have all been considered in the round. So it is determined on its own merits, but you are constrained by what you've already agreed and given the puzzle that has been linked together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be a couple more queries, so I'll wait before I bring officers back. Councillor Mumford.
I'm just going to address myself from where we ended up after we decided to approve and look at this application on what we're being asked to do. If the officers are adding to their list, why am I in my papers being told at 632 that the air quality effect from this site is not significant? I'm surprised at the comment of the 5-year housing land supply. To lose 800 houses would be quite considerable. On the 106 contributions, I do not like the backstop. You say we've got a backstop if it's not on site. That allows people to get it out of it. When we passed this, we looked at a health centre on site. So where you say there's a backstop, I'd like to see that removed. I've looked at the public right-of-way, and I tend to agree with both KCC and the landowner, and I'm quite happy for that change. The bus service that we fought hard for BST, I'm told on these papers, wouldn't be viable. But we were trying to reduce movements, and one of the main movements we get are school traffic. We put a bus in, and it was supported, and it's in the 106 for Cornwallis Academy. I would like to use the head or whatever of the unsuccessful bus service to Bearsted to be replaced to one to what I call Oldborough Manor, so that's New Line Learning. And I'm nearly tempted to propose the same as I proposed last times, with those amendments and the answers to them, that we reflect the same proposal as last time.
With those changes, yes. Is that seconded? Councillor Harwood, do you wish to speak now?
No, I'll reserve my right. I think this is straightforward.
Thank you very much. Okay, yes, I will now let officers come back.
Okay, on the 2 points raised by Councillor Mumford, first of all, the health centre on-site issue. While I think it's desirable for a health centre on-site, the need created by the proposed development does not allow itself to be met by a suitably sized health centre. The clinical commissioning group have been engaged in this process, and they require a building that would accommodate 5 to 6 GPs. The scheme in front of members this evening creates an equivalent need to under 2 GPs, and therefore we can't require a building of an appropriate size for the CCG to be provided on site simply to meet the needs of this development. That said, we are seeking to provide an environment where an on-site provision can be produced on the back of a commercial negotiation using the need of the scheme itself as a starting point. I should also point out the application itself includes D1A medical use as one of the possible uses, so that is included within the description of development. The second point on the bus service to Bourton, New Line Learning, Bourton Manor, I think was mentioned. I think that's a suggestion we can look to take forward in the Section 106 heads of terms that we have previously discussed in relation to the other application, and we can bring that back to, I think, the political spokespeople, as was discussed previously, to report on how viable that is, but I see no reason right now why that isn't possible.
Mr Jarman, you were frowning. Yes, I'll bring you back in a minute, Mr Mumford. Mr Jarman.
Yeah, as I suggested on the last application, I don't think there's a major issue with, as I proposed before, you, Chairman, and the Vice Chairman or party spokespersons being at the meeting to finalise the Section 106, as it were. I don't think that's a problem at all. But I don't see the need, given that we're 14 months on from July 2016, the point of bringing it back again to Planning Committee. On the health centre, I think this is straightforward, actually. All we're saying is, ideally, the CCG will build a health centre on this site. However, we can't force them into doing that. And to future-proof it, if they take the decision that there's a site better located elsewhere, then the money will go towards that. Lastly, on this public right-of-way, if we turn back the clock 14 months, what we wanted to do in terms of a cycleway is widen, I think I said this in August, we wanted to widen the public right-of-way, because it's a public right-of-way, to accommodate cyclists as well. KCC didn't want any change to the public right-of-way, so within the Taylor Wimpey land, if I can put it this way, and the countryside land, we go in for a cycleway and obviously footway independent of the public right-of-way. Bit of a duplication if you ask me, but there you go.
Well, sometimes belts and braces are needed. Councillor Mumford, as it was your issue, would you like to come back briefly before we move?
Yeah, there was no intention that the 106 come back to this committee, just that the political spokesmen are a party to that. And also, on the heads of the 106, can we very quickly include a 106 head for the facilities at Ottham that have just been offered to us?
Mr Bailey, that seems to be your cue for coming in as you wanted.
I just wanted to pick up while we're on this topic. There's 2 points. Certainly, Councillor Mumford, that is an issue. It's consistent with the previous recommendation. I would just like to add to what the legal officer said in terms of decision-making. You know, in terms of consistency, that is critical in terms of a quasi-judicial committee when making a decision. Obviously, I'm not going to go into cost issues, but these are issues that are considered, and I need to point that out to members in terms of consistency of decision-making in terms of that process. It's a very important element that members need to consider. I would just also wish to add, in terms of Councillor Mumford's issue on the bus services, I obviously was heavily involved in the Bicknell Farm, and we added, you know, it's a little wording in terms of the bus contribution which meet the needs of the development. Now, instead of going into specifics in terms of saying, you know, because let's meet the needs of New Line Learning, one, we've got to meet the SIL regulations, and I think just a little bit of wording in terms of that would encapsulate those issues that meet the needs of the development. So I don't necessarily, I agree with Mr Jarman, I don't think there's a need to get into that finite detail, because we would have that in the wording of the condition which, as Mr Jarman is seeking full delegation. So that would be covered anyway, and certainly was covered in the Bicknell Farm Section 106 that's already been approved. So I'll just add those points for members to consider. Thank you.
Okay, Councillors Mumford and Harwood, are you satisfied with the responses, or would you like to do anything different? Mr Harwood?
I think the safeguard here is that the group spokespersons are going to be consulted on some of the detail, and I think that can iron out the issues. I mean, I could talk about all sorts of issues about, like, the bus lay-by for Audi and things like that, but this is not the time and place to do it. That can be hammered out with the spokespersons.
Councillor Powell.
Yeah, Mr Chairman, again, my comments tonight are just observations, and just picking up again from all the speakers this evening. Earlier on, Mr Jarman was asked about the 5-year land supply, and the answer that came back is within 2 years he felt that we would be under that figure. A question I would like to ask before I come on to what I wanted to talk about: was that taken into consideration, the windfalls? Did you?
Obviously, we've got an objectively assessed need. That is largely what we've permitted already, because the local plan process started in 2011, plus the allocations. In simple terms, they're seen as banked, plus the windfalls on top of that. So it's clearly not about, oh, let's get rid of all the allocated sites and replace them with windfalls. You need both.
I would suggest otherwise, because what the big issue that we're talking about tonight, and I'm not turning the clock back, but we were talking about transport and air traffic and pollution, and I mean the fact that it says in the report tonight that the inspector said that the air quality wasn't significant. It's not for me to say what the inspector should be doing, but I don't think he should be doing the job that he was doing if he's going to come up with comments like that. It's 50% behind regulation, and regulation is put there for a reason. It's put there for a reason because it's people's lives that are affected. But anyway, also we heard as well about this traffic survey that was done. This has never been mentioned. It's the first I've heard of this million movements per annum. I think it was Councillor Newton, I think, mentioned that earlier on. That there are still... We've got to come back. We've got to come back to the original kind of situation. OK, yes, we granted permission. Whether I accepted it or whether I not is irrelevant now. It's done. There wasn't a transport strategy in place at the time. So all of a sudden we're being asked to look at Section 106 payments on a transport strategy which is up in the air. I don't really mind what KCC or NBC stand. There is still a massive difference between the two organisations, and unfortunately because of that there was an outside body brought in, but again that is something else. There's more questions to be asked than I have answers on the whole of this, and that is why I will continue to be negative as far as this site is concerned.
Councillor Clark, please.
Chairman, I wanted to make a point about the buses that would serve New Line Learning. A bus heading to New Line Learning from this site would either be going down to the Wheatsheaf and back up, or along Heath Road and down. Once you get to the Swan Junction for New Line Learning, you can't do a U-turn, you have to carry on, and I think that it would be really beneficial to have Cornwallis as well as New Line Learning, because you've effectively got to go that far anyway before you can turn around or work a way around at Linton Corner. And I think that should be added to the mix, because that's a very constrained corridor for buses, for school children especially, and I think that could bring benefits that could mitigate the extra traffic movements.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cox.
It's just a point of clarification, really, about the medical centres. You pointed out that a site this size would only require one that would take 1 or 2 doctors. Yet all of these sites together are going to need, as we've been pointed out, 6 or 7. Where do we find the bit of land unless we're looking and choosing one of these sites to host all of the requirement? So, I mean, if we're looking at this piecemeal, we're going to end up with 3 little surgeries, whereas we need 1 big one. So is there not provision on this site to take the requirement that is needed for all of this area if we're moving this number of people in here? So that's I want it clarified. I'm just saying, why are we looking at this site only to take the provision?
Thank you very much. We'll come back to that in a minute now, but I'll take Councillor Prendergast in case she has any questions, and then we'll bring the officer back together.
Thank you. So we currently find ourselves in a position where KCC have a holding objection due to traffic congestion. Traffic congestion, in my mind, has an impact on air quality. So if we take that, Councillor Mumford mentioned that the impacts on air quality from this development are not significant. You did, actually. You pointed it. That's what I'm repeating. The fact is that that air quality assessment was carried out in 2014. The bigger picture on air quality has moved on massively since then, as you admitted, and the local plan inspector has pointed out to you. Can I just ask one thing? Have we taken into account the cumulative impact of air quality, given the South East Strategic Development map that you showed us earlier? Because, as we all know, the Wheatsheaf Junction is over 50% over current limits. So when you say not significant on such a huge... Okay.
Okay. Mr. Chapman already had a point, and I'll bring you back in a minute. But...
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted to point out on the health centre front is that the reality over the last few years is that the PCT and now the CCG, as is, have been unable to engage proactively in seeking a comprehensive solution in the way that Councillor Cox outlined. We need them on board in order to properly meet the needs in terms of healthcare. They are now on board, and I think that's certainly a positive thing from officers' point of view, and we are seeking to facilitate their requirements with the sites that we have remaining.
Thank you, Mr. John.
Yeah, as Mr. Bailey pointed out earlier, all the sites, including the ones that have largely been built out now, it's all been looked at cumulatively in terms of the increase in traffic flows. All the traffic assessments speak to one another. But to cut to the chase with the inspector, yes, the inspector was concerned about air quality because of increased traffic flows, and that's the main reason for negative impact on air quality in Maidstone Borough. But the fundamental point was that the inspector thought something positive, something constructive could be done about there. And as I said earlier, that meant improving the Wheatsheaf junction, the Willingdon Street junction, and encouraging modal shift. And the Section 106s, which are before you tonight, plus the monies, are aimed at reducing traffic flows in order to improve air quality. So stress, improve.
Briefly, yes.
In that case, if the Highways Authority are maintaining their objection, who is going to deliver the mitigation on this? How are we going to deliver so we actually have a reduction in the air quality limit values at Wheatsheaf? I'm asking a question I don't understand, because I have never seen a report that shows the cumulative effects of development on that particular junction.
Air quality is Maidstone Borough Council's responsibility, and I'm personally very concerned about air quality. I think it's incumbent on Maidstone Borough Council to try and improve air quality. As I said earlier, with the land north of Bicknor Woods outline application, what would happen with the Section 106 monies for the improvement of the A274 is that there would be a trigger point that was hit by the developer's countryside, and therefore money would be collected by Maidstone Borough Council, and then it would be transferred to Kent County Council, and I'd like to think that Kent County Council would then spend that money on improving the Wheatsheaf Junction, the Willingdon Street Junction, and encouraging modal shift.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jarman. Right. Very quickly, Mr. Bailey.
I don't want this to be a duo act, but just adding to that, you asked a simple question, who's going to be responsible? Let's not forget what the developer is proposing as part of this scheme in terms of dealing with air quality. I don't want to cite a massive list, but we've got, in terms of the landscape management, you've got significant setbacks from the A274 in terms of massive amounts of open space being provided on the site, 19.77 hectares of open space on site. You've got the bus contribution that Mr. Jarman's already raised. There are significant elements that the developer is providing as part of this scheme to aid air quality mitigation as part of this scheme. And the Inspector took all account of those issues when he made the assessment. And let's look at, going back to that plan again, SP3 policy, which is the strategic policy for the South East allocation. So they were considered in the round, as the Inspector has to consider the local plan in the round. He considered almost 4 pages, which I've got in front of you. I won't wish to bore you with it, on the air quality issues. And he proposed modifications to that to address that in the emerging local plan. So he said you need to do these things and said this is the modifications you need to change in the policy. So the applicants have done a lot of those issues when they considered that mitigation as part of this application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey. Right, members. A motion has been proposed and seconded. I think it probably would be a good idea before we go any further to actually make sure everyone's aware of what that is, which was...
If I may, my understanding is it's basically exactly the same as what it was previously. The issue with the bus service is going to remain as it originally was because of the additional wording that would be added into the Section 106. Yeah? So it would be... sorry, I've got to read my own handwriting for a second. Hold on.
You should be a doctor.
It'll be recommend on the papers... amend to look at using the community facility funding elsewhere for autumn, sorry. Omitting the cascade effect. Political spokespersons, details of Section 106 will consult with the chairman, vice chairman and political spokespersons, and negotiations are between MBC and the developer, not KCC. That's what it was on the Bicknor.
Mr. Bailey wants to add something or check something.
The issue with the community contributions can't be the same as the other one because that's to Oton. This is the site across the road. I just need to check where is that contribution.
Okay. Right. Okay, members. It's the same, except that Otten will be included in. We're looking on and off-site contributions, and looking at that will include looking at Otten, not necessarily guaranteeing it, but looking at Otten as part of that. Okay, members, clear on that? Amendment.
Yeah.
I don't see any. Oh, well, as she's not actually addressing the meeting. Councillor Prendergast, are you proposing something? I'm told you were.
I was inquiring if I can move an amendment.
Well, of course you can.
Wonderful. In that case, and I hope I get some support from it, I am still very, very uncomfortable about the delegated decision on the Section 106s. This is the largest allocation in our emerging local plan, 800 homes, and I would be much more comfortable. I know that you've opened it up to political spokespersons, but I would feel much more comfortable if this was brought back to this committee.
I'm afraid it can't be. I regret to say. It's not that we're trying to be difficult, but it's already been deferred. And it's already come back to this committee on the substantive discussion for the decision on the Section 106s. So I'm not aware of a procedure that would allow us legally to do that. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I just don't think it's actually legally possible. Mr. Bailey?
Well, I would just add that obviously you've got a resolution in terms of the political spokespersons coming forward, and that would be represent the groups that are coming forward. So I think in terms of that already agreement that you've got here, that gives you the strength that members are going to be involved in that issue. So I would endorse what the chairman has said. I don't see, and yes, it's quite right, I don't think there is a constitution issue about bringing it back, but notwithstanding that, you have a representation from your party members at those discussions.
Of course, because this is an important point.
So why don't we extend it to political spokespersons and members of the planning committee who wish to attend?
I think in terms of, as I've clearly said before, you have representation from your spokespersons. And I think that is a way to progress that. The spokespersons would be at that meeting. Any concerns that you as a member, any concerns that were raised could be raised through the political spokesperson.
The only exception is we could invite. It would be very difficult to invite everyone because effectively that becomes a non-public meeting in the planning committee, which is rather difficult. It's just not possible. The only alternative is not to include the chairman, vice chairman, and political group spokespersons and leave it entirely to the officers. And I get the sense that members would prefer not to do that. You are, of course, within your rights to do so.
Sorry, just to hopefully be constructive, hopefully there will be a meeting involving you, Chair, the Vice Chair and party spokespersons. It'd certainly be helpful to me as an officer if the the concern could be highlighted, what specific part of the Section 106 or parts are giving the greatest consternation, because obviously we can do preparatory work to tackle those specific issues to make it a productive meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, is everyone clear? Everyone's clear on what's being proposed and seconded. Unless anyone wants to move any further amendments, I will now move to the vote. Hang on a moment. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, as stated, all those in favour of the motion proposed and seconded by Councillors Mumford and Harwood, please indicate. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, that falls to me to use my casting vote. Yeah. Which is an uncomfortable position, but it was 6-6, wasn't it?
I've got 6.
That can't.
6 against 2 abstentions.
That can't be right. Right. Hang on. That's not right. That can't be right.
Okay.
We need to take that vote again because that makes 14 people, and we don't have 14 people. Those in favour, please indicate. Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Abstentions? 1. Sorry.
Right, that adds up now. Right, thank you very much. Right, in that case, it does fall to me as chairman to exercise my casting vote, and I cast that in favour of the recommendation to approve as set out. 6 all. I'll give any members of the public who wish to leave a moment or two. Yeah. Whilst that's happening, may I ask whether any members are likely to want to have the Haven Hunton Road Marden introduced? Because that's a starred item, and if members do not wish to... If anyone... Can I take it that I'm just checking. If members are not minded to want that introduced, I'm actually going to just move that so that the applicant can go home. Those in favour of the recommendation to grant? Yes, Councillor Cox seconded, yeah. Thank you very much. Do I see Mr Tarnsett for the...
Is that unanimous, sorry?
Yes, that's everyone. That application is approved. Thank you. Okay, now we move on to land north of Bicknor Wood. I think if anyone wants to... Have we got that? Yep. Yeah, okay, we are now ready to move on to land north of Bicknor Wood. Item 3, page 18, page 264.
Okay. Apologies for the technical hitch. Okay. Considering the lateness of the hour, I will try and be as concise as possible. This is a full planning application for the same site as was considered previously, land north of Bicknor Wood. So I will confine my comments to the differences between that and the previously now approved scheme. The previously approved scheme was identical to this one, although the application did not specify the number of units. So this one specifies the number of units as 250. In effect, it's the same scheme because that was an outline application. The layout is shown on the site plan here, including a extensive buffering on all four sides of the site, detailed here. And here we have the parameter plan, including that buffering and Bicknell Wood to the south again. The design has been mentioned, looking at the outline scheme, has evolved over the period and has, I think, personally improved and is a significant benefit in terms of materials, which now include ragstone. The design has been refined, and here you'll see the layout of the proposal with the buffers shown in green around it, and here a breakdown of the open space, which equates to 5.7 hectares as opposed to policy requirement of 3.99 hectares. So greatly in excess of policy requirements in relation to that. I mentioned ragstone. You'll see that in dotted in red are the landmark locations of buildings with ragstone included within them. And here is a typical elevation, including the ragstone on the ground floor, to give an indication of the style of proposed elevations. Materials again are shown in detailed here, using red multi-stock facing brick, red stock facing brick, orangey brown plain tile hanging, and plank cladding with roofs again suitably clad. Here are some sections through. I'm not going to dwell on these, but we have a number of these which we can look in greater detail, and here are a couple of perspectives to give a sense of place to the proposal. The landscape master plan is here, and we have a final slide showing the alteration in the road layout. This was approved when the committee first considered the application back last year, and obviously is consistent with the early decision made this evening. The report indicates the key areas, and I think I'll just focus members' attention on a couple of points. First of all, the site is allocated in our draft local plan for 190 units. The proposal is for 250 units. It is my professional view that the site can successfully accommodate the extra number of units, and indeed the 190 suggestion in the allocation is an approximate figure. Some site allocations are exceeded, some site allocations, as was the case for the Bicknell Farm site, are not exceeded. In fact, less units was provided on that site than allocated. I think the other point to make is the community facilities point, which was raised earlier. No particular community facilities in terms of a building are proposed on site, although the open space requirement is exceeded. But if I go back to policy SP3, which includes this site, the global policy for this area includes community facilities provided on H15, which is the site known as Langley Park. And the site provides strong public rights of way to the Langley Park site, where the primary school serving this site is located. I think I'll pause there, but I'll hope to pick up any questions once they come.
Thank you. Sorry? Yeah, in due course. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm not going to go over spilt milk, not too much at least, other than to say I think this evening we'll be greeted by many residents in Maidstone with a huge sigh and enormous disappointment that there was an opportunity for Maidstone Borough Council to work with Kent County Council on 106 matters to deliver an improved situation with regards to a strategic solution to what are strategic problems in Maidstone South East, which I represent as a county councillor. I think that is a huge shame and flies in the face of a unanimous decision by the JTB that asked Maidstone Borough Council and Kent County Council to work closely together to bring to fruition a relief road at the earliest possible date. And I think that has been knocked a long way sideways this evening, and that's on your consciences. I'm going to ask members to refuse the planning application this evening. I'm presuming that the difference between 190 and 250 is windfall. Do we really need another 60 units that are going to add 60 more cars to the highways situation that we have? In terms of the principle of the outline, I'm not going to object to that. I think actually some of the aesthetics of what is being proposed on this site are actually quite nice. I think they will look good. But it's the principle. The outline provides for 190. The local plan provided for 190. So why do we suddenly have to increase that to 250? The other thing that I specifically would wish, and clearly there is a holding objection on traffic and highways grounds from the Highways Authority. The statutory Highways Authority has said that there is a problem and that objection would hold up in an appeal. But I really want you to focus on the proposal, paragraphs 2.3 and 2.4, and the changes that are proposed to Whitehorse Lane, Gorecourt Road, and generally the access in and around there. All of that, whatever you do from a planning point of view, is highways matter. It will require a road traffic order, and then Kent County Council will have a statutory duty to consult with all the residents locally in terms of the changes that are being proposed. I can assure you that in the same way that there is huge public objection to what is currently being proposed for Willington Street and Sutton Road, there will be huge public objection to this. And whatever you agree this evening, the applicants need to understand there is no guarantee that any of those traffic changements will materialise, and I think you should ask the officer to confirm that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Councillor Gray, Otton Parish Council, please.
Good evening again. As I've argued previously, Otton desperately requires a new community centre, a community amenity, a place for new and old residents to mix and build a new community, not just more open space. We have plenty of that. We're a rural village. So a community centre would be vital for social cohesion and to prevent division and resentment. And I do appreciate the support from councillors tonight. Although we do really appreciate the request from councillors to look at the allocation of Section 106 money from the Langley development, our small village is in a conservation area. So we don't have a suitable site to build a community centre apart from on this site, which is in the heart of our village. So the Parish Council would really like to see a change in these plans from Bellway to accommodate a small community centre with outside space and parking for use by the new larger village community of Otton, but it must be on this site. This is actually the core proposal in our emerging neighbourhood plan, and we have evidence that this has the support of the whole village of community of Otton and from Bearstead Football Club, who also are based in Otton. But this new development in the heart of Otton Parish is the only viable location for a new community centre, and we ask for just a few of the planned 240 houses, rather than the original 190 that were proposed, to be replaced by a new community centre. We're also extremely concerned about rat running, but I know that's been discussed already this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Councillor Cheeseman, Downswood Parish Council.
Good evening again. I'm just really reiterating all that I said previously, also in the fact that I was told that the Section 106 agreement monies had to be spent really to help and be used in the local community. Well, to have the Langley-Leeds bypass will certainly help the local community because it will cut down on the traffic, the pollution, the noise. I can't see how that cannot be taken as helping in the local community. We cannot, with the traffic, take on any more traffic through Downswood. The whole point of having this extra development means that we're losing the character of our rural area. We can't take any more houses. We can't. It's not just having so many 250 houses there. It means that you've got great communities. And when you're talking again about the medical centres, that's fine. But where on earth do you get the GPs? Downswood has lost its local surgery. They've cut that. We haven't got the facilities locally. And I can't see when there's a national shortage of GPs, even if you can afford to fund an enormous new doctor surgery, where are you going to get the GPs from? That's just a couple of the things that really make me worried and concerned that we're overpopulating our local area, and that you just cannot have all the local facilities and people having to travel from their local area to main centres for them. So please do reconsider and reject this proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Goodman for the applicant, please.
Good evening once again. I'd like to make some brief points in respect to the application in terms of the design and community facilities that have been raised. In terms of design, the scheme has been carefully considered and adopts an architectural approach in keeping with the site's semi-rural setting and local building traditions, and includes a mix of tile hanging, boarding and ragstone materials, as the officer suggested. The scheme is landscape-led, with significant buffers incorporated throughout to protect the ancient woodland, respect the amenity of the Gore Court Road residents, and introduce a new belt of woodland planting. The policy envisaged 3.99 hectares of open space. However, the application proposes 5.7 hectares. This represents 40% of the total site area and will support various open space functions, including new woodland and play space areas. The scheme has a low density when compared with other recent schemes and consists of predominantly two-storey, semi-detached and detached dwellings. In terms of the community facilities, I confirm that we support shifting Section 106 money from Senacre to Otton Parish Council, should councillors think that that's appropriate. However, in terms of the suggestion of putting such a facility on the site, This is not in the planning policy for the application side, and in my view would not meet the necessary tests for Section 106 agreements. In terms of sort of summing up from where we are with the application, we're committed to delivering this scheme of high quality with a landscape-led vision for the site. And for these reasons, and for the reasons set out in the committee report, we respectfully request that members approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Goodman. Councillor Newton, please.
Thank you very much. Comments on this? I think we've been along with the development of it. I've certainly been to some of the meetings where we've discussed the greenery and things like that. One thing that I am very concerned about, this was originally 190 dwellings. It's now up to 245, and yet here we have the developer saying there's no space for a community centre. I don't agree with that. I'm afraid it needs to be found. It would be also interesting to know how many parking spaces there are per dwelling, because the sizes of the roads, you'll have considerable amount of traffic on the roads. The other concern I have, as do Southern Water, is the runoff, the water runoff and potential flooding. Although you've got ponds there, it's having seen what's happened recently from Imperial Park, flooding the houses down the road again because the hedgerows were taken out. I think everybody else has said what's needed, and let's hope that we can get to some Section 106 money for this hall. Thank you very much. One other thing, I've got 1:35 minutes left, seconds left. What I would like to see is traffic assessment in respect of Gore Court Road and Church Road coming off this site and through the site from the A274. I note that traffic lights are proposed at the entrance to Imperial Park against the recommendations of Kent Highway Services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Newton. Did you want to add anything? No? Right. Just checking. Councillor Mumford. You did, but maybe you just changed your mind. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman.
Quite right. I apologise. There is an urgent update, and I should have taken declarations of lobbying. Thank you for the reminder.
Lobbied.
Yeah. Lobbied. That's everyone apart. Yeah, that's everyone. Okay. Thank you for the reminder, gentlemen. Right. Councillor Harwood, you did indicate, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we've had the principle and the policy discussion over this site. I think now we move on to the detail of the scheme. And an awful lot of this committee have spent an awful lot of time in negotiation with the applicants on here. And this is the product of many, many hours of discussion, and actually it's a very good scheme in terms of the elevations, in terms of the architecture, in terms of the protection of the ancient woodland, in terms of avoiding suburbanisation. We wanted this development to look towards Otton Village and not look towards Sutton Road, and it is chalk and cheese with the existing development on Sutton Road in terms of its layout, in terms of its scheme. I mean, we talk about the drainage issue, that this has got high quality suds. It hasn't even got close boarded fencing in it. You've got ha-has in it, so you can see the landscape, you can see the wood. I hear what is said about the community facility point. However, that was not put into the negotiations early on. It was never figured in any of the discussions that took place. And it would not be community infrastructure levy compliant to launch it in now. In terms of this point around the additional units, this is a design-led approach, and because of that, there are some mews of cottages and so on where more units are put in than the more kind of Grove Green style, more suburban development. So I think actually that there are benefits, and we must remember that additional Section 106, the £750,000 for Junction 7, which is only, I suggest, tenuously linked to a scheme in this site, has been awarded. So I think if we were to kind of mess about with the overall scheme or mess about with the numbers, I think we start to undermine not so much the viability but the quality of the scheme, which I think is the critical point here, in that this is a scheme which will do Otton proud. Hopefully, I mean, if we've got to have development, this is the sort of development we want. Just look at Hermitage Lane, look at some of these other sites if you want to see what the alternative could be. So I think if we're going to have development, this is about as good as it will get on this scheme. Therefore, I am willing to move that we do grant permission. I mean, that is with the slight variation in terms of the Section 106, same as before, so that we can hopefully look at Otton. So maybe Seneca, if it does not require this, we can look at Otton provision. And clearly, the issue around the Section 106 on transport will need to be changed in line with the previous two permissions. I mean, it absolutely has to be on this one because the outline has been altered, so therefore we can't have opposition between Section 106s on the same scheme. So with that said, I'll move that we do grant permission. Thank you.
Or doing that, I'll ask whether that's seconded. Councillor Cox, do you wish to speak now or later?
The only thing I was actually going to do, and I was not sure whether Mr Mumford would do it for continuity with some of the other sites, we've been told that this is looking at the local design as well, and I heard boarding, white boarding. Can you please clarify that that is going to be real wood, or is it going to be UPVC white boarding? So if it is, then I'd like to see if we can have a recommendation, or a condition rather, to have that as real wood, please. Other than that, I'm happy to support.
Rob, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, I was going to pick up on that general point. I haven't been closely involved in this application at all, but it seems to me that there's been a lot of constructive work undertaken by both councillors and officers to get some decent quality. All I was going to say was for instance, the materials condition kind of ignores that, in that it's just asking for the submission of details of materials. But you've been shown ragstone, tile hanging, weatherboarding. I'm sure Bellway will go along with it. Let's pin them down to what they're actually proposing. And it's the same with landscaping. The conditions are worded as if nothing's been submitted, to be quite frank. And also, as I think Councillor Harwood picked up on this, there is no outline because that application is the subject of a non-determination appeal. So we've got to be careful with the recommendation for the 106 for this full application.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Councillor Prendergast, please.
Thank you. I was going to seek some rationale for the officer comment about a 30% increase in the number of dwellings being acceptable. I know Councillor Harwood at the end has had a stab at it already, which was quite interesting. But I am finding, I would like some explanation, some understanding on that, because to me it seems to be undermining our strategic housing policies, allocations that have gone into the local plan. Why put X number of houses in and then say it's acceptable to have 30% more? So I'd like some explanation on that as well. And the other thing is, I just want to talk about this community facility, why can't we put something on site? The applicant mentioned that he didn't think that it would meet the test, the Section 106 test for a community, for a community village hall on site. So, would it or would it not? I'd just be interested to know. Thanks.
If I can come back on that last point, first of all. The policy SP3 provides, as we've been mentioning earlier, the strategic framework for the South East Maidstone sites and identifies H15 as the appropriate location for a new community centre. The requirement for community facilities on this site, in my professional opinion, would not be sustained under Section 122 of the SIL regs, in that it would not be, in my opinion, considered reasonable, proportionate to require such a facility. And indeed, when the committee last considered this, the equivalent application last year, it was not a requirement. It was not a requirement put forward by KCC in terms of their community facilities obligations. And as I've said, it's not something I feel we need this application in order for it to be successful in planning terms.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was going to pick up that other point. Principally, I'm just going to refer you back to the H policies, which sort of encapsulate in the emerging local plan. Within the preamble to that policy, paragraph 6.6, it says that the dwelling yield in the final column is an estimate, and the actual number of dwellings on each site could be higher or lower following the detailed consideration of a planning application. So that's the preamble to the H1 policy which sets it out. So in order to give, we have to give a figure against the site, and that's, that is worked out. But principally, as Mr. Jarman and the case officers already said, this scheme was design-led. So what you have to consider is those number of units, 250, capable of being able to accommodate on site, retaining the character of the site, retaining those important landscape features in terms of the buffers to the ancient woodlands, and come up with a design-led scheme. And in this instance, the officer view obviously is, yes, it is on that basis, and that's what the report sets out. So that sets the context for that yield on site.
At a request of a member for a call of, shall we say, one kind or another, this meeting is adjourned for 2 minutes. He leaves, and he comes back, he won't be able to vote, so we will adjourn for 2 moments.